Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining us wherever you are around the world. We're really excited to have everybody for the third Wise Talk, where we bring people from Wise as well as our esteemed guests to talk about important customer topics ranging from product to marketing and everything in between. I'm really lucky to be here with a group of three other really awesome people from around the world. We're going to be talking about building transparent roadmaps today. For those of you who are watching, we would encourage you to engage with us on the real-time Q&A through the Q&A functionality that you'll have on your webcast. Let's kick it off with some introductions. My name is Lindsay Grossman. I'm Director of Product for Wise in the North America region. I'm based in New York City, but get to work with people all around the world. I'm excited to be joined here by Daniel Thomason, who's a colleague of mine. He's a Senior Product Manager on Wise's Financial Crime Prevention team. In addition to helping us fight crime and keep our users safe, he's also spearheaded the public roadmap work that we've done here at Wise. So that's what he's going to talk to us about today. Before he joined us at Wise, he was also at N26 and a number of other companies, and he's an economist by trade. We'll also be joined by Sarah Joshi, who is Principal Product Lead at Atlassian. She is responsible for driving outbound enterprise customer experience. She's engaging with a number of their large customers around the world. And as part of that, she spearheaded the initiative to bring Atlassian's roadmap to public. And so she coordinates and works across all of the product teams to make this a reality. And we'll talk to us about how that's done. She's joining us from Seattle, whereas Daniel's in Tallinn, Estonia. And then our third and final panelist is Anson Parker, who is joining us from Melbourne. He's the head of product at Up Banking, where he's leads a number of product teams in addition to the initiative to bring their entire roadmap public as well to their customers. So he's also lived in a number of other places, including San Francisco, and we're really excited to have everybody today. Cool. Well, let's get started and jump straight into the conversation. I'm going to ask everybody to walk us through, give us some context about who your company is and also how you decided to make the roadmap public and what it looks like today. And then we'll transition into going into some of the details after with it. With that, I'm going to turn it over first to Daniel to kick us off.
Thanks, Lindsay. So I'm representing Wise here today, the host of the panel. And so our vision here at Wise is money without borders. Wherever you are in the world, making it easy to deal with your money. And so underpinning that vision are our four mission pillars: instant, convenient, transparent, and eventually free. That's what we're aiming for here. That's sort of the reason we exist. And so some of the highlights of that, if we take a look at where we are today, we serve over 10 million customers worldwide in more than 50 currencies, thanks to the great work from the regional teams that Lindsay's part of. And more than £5 billion every month gets moved through Wise. And as part of that, we've got these 70 autonomous product teams. And these numbers that I've just shown you and talked to you about, we talk about these every quarter in our mission update. Every quarter, we publish this blog post where we say, here's how much we've lowered the price. Here's how much faster we're getting. Here's these new currencies that we've launched. And at some point, we sort of asked ourselves, okay, look, we're very good. We've sort of built up really good muscle around this backwards looking, how have we gone this past quarter, this past year? But we don't do quite so much forward looking, what's coming up? What can we promise to our customers that we are investing time and energy in doing? So that's what kind of led us to thinking, okay, how can we live this value of transparency in a product forward-looking way? And so as part of that, we created this next artifact you see here. This was the first iteration, or the second now, of our product roadmap that we publish openly. So this is our attempt to say, okay, here's what we've done well this coming quarter, or this past quarter, sorry, in the mission update, and here's what you can look forward to. Here's some new currencies that we might be launching. Here's some places where you might see price drops, and all these sort of places. And I think my favorite part of this, I'll talk more about it later, but having a look down the bottom there, you see the little emojis around the mission pillar. Just having those attached to each of these roadmap items was such a good way to center the conversation on why are we doing what we're doing. So creating this and linking it back to the mission pillars was just such an amazing exercise.
Thanks, Daniel. I'm now going to turn it over to Ensign to talk to us a little bit about Up.
Thanks, Lindsay. So I'm Anson Parker, the head of product at Up. We're a digital bank in Australia. So we started just under 3 years ago, which is a little behind probably the neobanks in the UK and Europe, but we're very much kind of cut from that cloth. The team is quite small, and we really come from a more of a software bank background rather than, say, a finance background. So we launched, as I said, in October in 2018, and into a very mature market. Banking has been around for centuries. The competitors, even in a quite young country like Australia, are 100, 200 years old. So launching into a market that is mature like that as a startup can be really challenging, because you're trying to hit sort of a minimum viable product, something kind of small and lightweight to get started, but you have this huge customer expectation. They're used to a certain level of functionality. So for us, we had this challenge of how do we sort of sell that journey or sell that dream? How do we reassure people that stuff that they don't have day one is coming in the future? And for us too, there was sort of this question of how do we kind of show how all of this stuff fits together? If someone's asking for a really cool but sort of sophisticated feature, how do we kind of explain that? We love that idea, but there's sort of a piece to get to before that. So if you jump to the next slide, you'll kind of see what we came up with, which is this visual roadmap effectively that we call the Tree of Up. And this is available through our website. I think there may be a link provided, or you can just Google the Tree of Up and you'll find it. And you access this through like a Google Maps style interface. You can sort of zoom and pan around so that you can make out the words. And this really shows how the features are connected together, and they're sort of broken down into these product areas. You can sort of see, which features come before others based on just the styling of the features, whether it's sort of an orange or a dotted or a blue circle. You can sort of see that now, next, future status communicated. But it also gave us a lot of sort of freedom to move outside of those conventions when we needed to as well. So you can kind of see there's little illustrations throughout it. We can talk to some areas, in our case, credit, that might be quite far off in the future, just with sort of hey, we're exploring this space. We don't sort of have formal features around it yet. But this has given us a lot of freedom. It's sort of an interactive roadmap as well. So you can actually tap onto these features and see the status of them and a description and that kind of stuff. And it's been, really well received by customers. It's something we've kept adding to. As you can probably tell, it's gotten quite big. And we sort of look forward to evolving it in the future too.
That's great. Excited to probe a little bit more into kind of that whole idea of transparency and freedom too, because also giving yourselves flexibility is a theme that I think we'll hear across the teams. Over to Sarah to talk to us about Atlassian.
Yeah, awesome. Thanks, Lindsay. If you want to pop over to the next slide. So Atlassian's mission is to unleash the potential of every team. Many of you have probably used an Atlassian product in your work life. Maybe you've heard of Jira or Trello. Maybe you use Trello for school or your own personal life as well. We actually just moved country and we used Trello to sell all of our furniture, which was really helpful. So we have a bunch of products that we provide to customers under the Atlassian brand, including Jira, Jira Align, Confluence, Trello, and some other products as well, like Jira Service Management. And we're based out of Sydney, Australia, with teams all around the world. And we've got over 5,000 Atlassians that help more than 180,000 customers empower their teams and drive their missions forward through our products. So if we go to the next slide, I can give a quick overview of our public roadmap. So if you hop over to atlassian.com/roadmap, that'll take you to this page. And our roadmap is probably a more traditional one in terms of showing all of the features across all of our big product investments, whether they are product specific or platform specific. Our roadmap really aims to detail those big rocks that customers are expecting Atlassian to deliver over short to medium term time horizon. And one of the big motivating factors of actually launching these public roadmaps, which we didn't launch until October of last year, so these are still pretty new. One of the big motivators is one of our corporate values, which is open company, no BS. We really want to be as open as possible and transparent as possible with our customers, especially our largest customers who are really planning their future investments and future moves with Atlassian of how their teams do work. And so it's really important to us to be as forthcoming with what's coming when, rather than kind of hiding that behind a sales conversation or an engineering conversation. We really wanted to put as much out there as possible. And just another screenshot here, you can filter, you can search. So we do have some of that additional functionality, which is awesome. If you're really looking for one specific feature like data residency in Australia, you can just use the search box.
That's great. And we'll get into some of the usability too when we talk about how your teams built this across all three companies. That's perfect. I'm going to stop sharing so we can get into a deeper conversation. Cool. So let's talk a little bit about the why. So the three things that I heard consistently were around transparency, making sure that you could help your customers plan, especially if they're, let's say, enterprise customers and there's like a longer lead cycle. And it also heard a little bit about you touch upon like the internal value as well as like aligning your own teams across these goals. Maybe let me start first with Anson. When you thought about like the ultimate why of doing this, like what was that single one or two things, and had you debated it for a long time before you went there?
I think the fundamental whys for us were, I guess, giving people that sense of, what I sort of call trajectory, like where are we going? Given that we're starting with something small, I think it's really important for people to understand the direction that you're going to take over time. Particularly with something like banking, where it is quite a sort of big decision for a lot of customers to make to switch that. But actually, the other interesting kind of, I think, why of our roadmap in particular is because we kind of have this map of the entire feature space, not just sort of the future feature space. There's a sense of like velocity, like how quickly are we moving through this, so people can see when things move from being worked on to being shipped, to being starting soon. We also sort of publish our release notes through the roadmap, so it serves as a bit of a change log as well. So I think those were kind of the two major customer benefits, and we could have probably done this with a more traditional roadmap, but I think part of our ethos is really trying to come at things from a different and rethink. And so I think it's been a great marketing tool as well, right? This really kind of interesting take on a roadmap, and it has turned out to be fairly practical as well, which is always good.
Daniel, what about you? How did you bring this? Why did Wise do this, and how did the company make it happen?
Yeah, it was an interesting conversation for us too. It kind of evolved out of an ongoing conversation that was happening about how we better engage with customers about not only what we had done, but also what we were going to do in the future and what we should do in the future. And I don't think that conversation is anywhere close to finished or sort of at an endpoint. Like, we've got this now that helps us be more transparent about what our plans are. But I've already had some feedback internally, and the conversation internally has been really interesting about how we take the next steps now about making it more of a dialogue with customers to say, here's what we think we should be doing. What do you think? Like, is this in line with where you think we should be spending our resources? And I guess ultimately that's sort of where the impetus for doing this came from. It was a desire to get ever closer to the customer and sort of bring us with both what we're saying and what we're doing, really sort of uncomfortably close almost, because I mean, that was actually one of the big debates that we had. You asked that question, Lindsay, of like, was there a big debate? And one of the debates was like, are we okay with kind of tipping our hand like this? Like, this is a little bit scary actually for a product team. Like, it's scary enough telling stakeholders, I'm going to ship something by next quarter, and now we're going to tell the whole world. But I think like it's just such a fundamental baked in part of the culture at Wise to be transparent and to kind of, I mean, almost bet the house on really delivering, that it was really, I don't think the debate lasted very long, as it were. So it was, I think the transparency thing really drove the day for us.
Sarah, what about you? You mentioned it's kind of a new thing for the company, even as recent as October. What was kind of the one or two reasons that really pushed you over the line to do this?
Yeah, I think there were a few things. One is like, how do we really espouse? We're all about our company values, and the open company, no BS value is so important in terms of previously, if the customer had a specific question around roadmap, they'd have to go through their account rep, and then that account rep would talk to engineering, and then a PM would get on the call. And the whole process was very, very inefficient. And we were sort of hiding that roadmap, not intentionally, but we were hiding that roadmap behind this process. And unless a customer asked, we wouldn't necessarily give an answer unless it was a big product announcement at something like our Team 2021, like our big summit events. And so one motivator was really like, how do we be as transparent as possible to really push things forward, to move things more to a self-service model rather than having to kind of bury it behind a sales conversation. Now, we do obviously enable our sales teams to have higher touch conversations and more strategic ones around the roadmap, but we really wanted to kind of drive that self-serve for customers, for instance, that are in Australia that are looking for a specific compliance regime or data residency. They can quickly search and say, oh, okay, this is when this is going to light up for Australia, so I can assume I can move in that time period. And to that, we had a compelling event that really led us to launch these roadmaps publicly in a big way, which was that we announced the end of life of our server line of business. We offer a few different options of deployment: server, data center, and cloud. And by announcing that in October, we then pointed our customers to, hey, Atlassian Cloud, it's amazing. 90% of our customers start on cloud. And so by helping that self-service way of a server customer being able to search and see, oh, okay, this is how I check my boxes from a compliance and security and regulatory perspective or end user feature perspective, we're really able to accelerate those decisions rather than had we not had these publicly, it would have been behind a support conversation or a sales conversation, and it would have slowed down that choice to make a move.
Transitioning a little bit into like how your teams did it, I'm curious, maybe as a follow-up, Sarah, on the side around like time horizons, did you decide to make commitments on timelines? Like, how open-ended did you leave those commitments in case, you know, roadmap shifted or execution changed?
Yeah, so we go out about 2 years in the future. We're obviously not painting the picture of what 5 or 10 years in the future looks like, but we are very committed to only showing work that's been committed and funded that's in progress. And so for that reason, obviously, we've got a whole lot that's coming soon, which is in the next quarter, what's in the works over the next year, and then future items that are further out on the roadmap but are committed work. And we really wanted to push the envelope on how transparent we were when it came to what we actually put in that future column, because we have customers, big enterprise customers, making these multi-year decisions around where they invest and what that looks like. And so we wanted to give as much transparency and as much detail as possible so that they would feel confident that Atlassian was investing in the right areas, that we were listening, that we were moving fast enough for them to be able to keep their business with Atlassian. And so it was definitely a delicate balance. We don't put stuff on the roadmap that's not committed. So nothing hand wavy, nothing exploratory, none of the big future ideas that we might be cooking in the kitchen. It's really the formally committed work that we're giving a time frame for when it'll ship.
Okay, that's really good. I'm going to contrast a little bit with Ensign. You mentioned before that sometimes you'll put ideas that are a little bit maybe less big or still bigger things that you still need to work through. How did you think about like timeline horizons of what you shared?
I mean, I think as a rule of thumb, we sort of work to maybe a 18, 24 month kind of time frame. I think generally we did keep it quite concrete in terms of features we, were fairly sure we wanted to build. I think there were a couple of areas where we just get a lot of inquiries all the time. Credit. Are you going to do a credit card? Are you going to do loans, lending? Was just a really common question we got from customers. So, as an organization, we weren't really sure where we were on that yet, and certainly not on time frame. So it just gave us the ability to sort of say, look, we're thinking about it, but that's all at this stage. But I do think, working out what to put on and what not to put on is probably the art of these roadmaps. Like we get a lot of questions about how did you make this? Like is there a tool? Is there a GitHub repository I could check out to do this? But mostly the advice I give people is that's sort of the easy part. The hard part is working out actually what to put on there.
Daniel, what about you? How did you guide the Wise teams to think about timeline horizons and also like level of depth and commitment on different features?
Yeah, Anson's definitely right. This is the art of the roadmap, and this is where all of the hard conversations happened, of trying to nail that balance between sufficient detail that it was actually something that customers could look forward to seeing rather than just something quite fluffy, but not so much detail that you ended up with something unreadable or sort of so technical that it was boring or kind of inaccessible. And this is a real art, and I'll be honest, I don't think we've nailed it quite yet. I think we're still finding our way forward. Like it's permanent beta is I think the right mindset here to some extent. But I guess the mindset we tried to take was, are customers going to like benefit from this? Is this something that's kind of like someone will say, wow, that's awesome. I'm really happy that that's going to exist in the future, and we'll be sort of marking in their calendar, watch out for Wise shipping X kind of thing. And so that's the mindset I at least encourage people to sort of think through. Would you be happy as a customer that this was coming out of this thing? And then in terms of the time horizon, that was also interesting because we had this same conversation as Sarah and Anson brought up of like, how vague are we happy being? If we've got something sort of a twinkle in a product director's eye, is that going to land on our later column? And we came down on the side of no. We came down, I think we shared the same viewpoint as these other two of we'd rather under promise and over deliver rather than put things on there that we then later have to say, it turned out not to be that great an idea. Because as product people, we know that happens, and that happens a lot of the time. But I think customers will feel a little bit, or there's a risk that customers will feel a little bit betrayed by having been sort of having the smell of the sausage wafted under their nose and then it taken away sort of thing. So this is, I think, a conversation that we'd like to evolve into the future. How do we do this in an elegant way that still kind of gives us the ability to engage in that conversation, but doesn't sort of lead to us falsely seeming like we're promising something? So I don't think we've solved that yet, but I have the same dilemmas as these guys.
And as we were talking, one of the things that I think is important to underscore is that all three of you, this is not your full-time job, right? You're leading product teams, you're leading different customer work in your day-to-day. Tell us a little bit about the who was involved, like what teams were involved. How did you herd the cats and get everybody on the same page? What tools did you use internally to even organize this information? Let's talk a little bit about people and process. Over to Sarah first.
Yeah, definitely not my full-time job, but it's become a really important one because we believe that this is so important for our customers that we make it happen. So I think, as you mentioned in the beginning, I lead the process across the entire company. And so Atlassian isn't a huge company, but it is 6,000 people. And we have so many products that we ship to customers, and it can be pretty overwhelming to even decide, to your points, Daniel and Anson, like what even put on the roadmap, what's the right level of detail. And so the way that we're organized, we've got a core team of myself, I have a PGM counterpart and a PMM marketing counterpart, and then we have a few other core team members, and we really are the stewards of the process, and we run the drumbeat. So we've got a Slack channel and we update every quarter. And so we say, hey, everyone, roadmap is kicking off for the quarter. Here are the instructions. And so over the past few cycles, we've improved the process each time. And so we now have standard templates. We use Confluence for everything, of course, Atlassian product. Highly recommend it for managing your roadmaps. So we've standard Confluence templates. We call it our Delta updates template. And so we've got a section for things that are shipped. They need to flip the switch, or the release notes, or the public documentation for it. New things that need to be added, changes that need to get made. So let's say something is delayed by a quarter, we need to update that, or maybe we shipped it early, so we can celebrate there. That's in the edits, and then also items to remove from the roadmap. Sometimes we do have to remove things from the roadmap. Sometimes things end up being renamed or moved to a different team, and so we remove them there. But yeah, it's about 6 of us that actually manage the drumbeat for the entire company. And then we do have a roadmap drivers model where each head of products, we've got 6 key areas. They do take accountability and responsibility for working with their respective teams to aggregate the updates, curate them and validate them, and then get sign off from engineering and their marketing counterparts. And then we run it through legal and RevRec and accounting. And then our web team takes everything and then puts it on the roadmap, again, on a quarterly basis. So it's not pure chaos, but it's definitely organized chaos, because there are probably 100 PMs participating in the process every single quarter. And so having to go back and forth through comments and saying, hey, did you really mean this date? Is this committed? Can you polish this external customer facing feature description? This is too technical, we don't understand it. There's definitely a level of herding cats, but it works. We've been able to do our updates on a quarterly basis, gotten great feedback. So it's definitely a process, I would say.
It's really helpful. Anson, what about you? How did you manage this internally?
Yeah, well, I guess we had the benefit, or I had the benefit of a company maybe a couple of orders of magnitude smaller than the other panelists' companies. So that always makes things easy, right? I mean, like, less people, it's harder to do stuff with less people, but decisions can be a bit faster. And, I think we, again, to go back to sort of the context of Up starting in this sort of mature space, there are a lot of features, those table stakes features that were definitely in our future. So there was sort of a lot of non-controversial parts of the roadmap, I think, as well as the wacky ideas that I wanted to put in there. So really, it was mostly around just socializing the idea and the kind of format, giving people a chance to have input, but it wasn't so much a question of wrangling a whole bunch of different product managers, people campaigning to get their feature on. So I think it was that made things a lot easier. And the focus was very much on, will this idea even work? Like, can this thing even translate? And that being able to put it up in front of the company. And I think even, and I'm sure we may get to this later, but even though the audience is sort of the custom for this, there's a massive benefit to internal, engineers, other stakeholders to see this stuff. So, it's freed me up from maintaining, spreadsheets and things like that people never really looked at anyway. I can just point almost everyone to this. So in some ways, it was about taking internal spreadsheets and translating the right pieces across to this. And so it wasn't sort of starting from zero in that way.
Great. Daniel, what about the process on the Wise side?
So we had the benefit of following in the footsteps of giants. Like I've told Anson this before, but actually Up was one of our inspirations for our roadmap. So we had a bit of a validated model to follow. So I didn't have to do the socializing work of proving it to people, as it were. But we ran super lean. The first iteration of this was me and a designer hacking away at this to try to come up with an MVP. And I think the only reason it worked was that we also had a very involved executive sponsor, so our VP of growth, who delegated one of the senior directors, Lindsay's lead actually, to sort of help shepherd me through the internal pathways that helped me gather the information that I would need for this. And so this combination of really lean, small team, me and a designer, combined with the sort of help where it was needed up top, made it possible to gather the information in. I think we shipped it in about a month. It was sort of ridiculous in the end, but I think that was the only way it was going to get done almost. If we had longer, we would have overbaked it. and it would have become a whole thing, and we would still probably be talking about it now. And so the only way to do it was kind of do it quickly, apologize to people like Lindsay for making her have some late nights, like correcting some of the errors that I'd made in the spreadsheet where I collected the information, ship it, see what the reaction was, and then say, hey, check it out, this was cool, now let's do it properly. And I'm pleased to tell you that now we have a wonderful product operations lead, Karen, who has taken it over. And so she's doing a much better job with it than I did, because she's actually instituted some structure. I think we are collecting it in Confluence. Sarah, you'll be pleased to know the information. So it started small, and now it's sort of growing the process around it.
Absolutely. So we talked a little bit about the internal tools that we used. Maybe what about the tools that you use to ship the public facing end product? So Anson, your feature is like pretty interactive web experience. What tools did you use?
So our roadmap is actually largely built in like Illustrator as just a big image, and we export that to the scalable vector graphics format, which is sort of a web native like Illustrator like format, which then allows us to kind of blend it with some some actual data around the features and their status and descriptions and things like that. So it's a fairly manual process at the moment, but it's just kind of been working. It's that thing of it's hard to pull like real engineers off real work to put them on this thing. But I think over time, we sort of joked before the panel around how roadmaps almost need their own roadmap. And that's sort of like, where do you want to take this from here? And I think from our point of view, being able to move this more towards sort of the code generated space will give us a whole bunch of benefits, giving people the ability to sort of replay the roadmap over time and see how it's evolved. Maybe more accessible views of the roadmap that are more text-based rather than graphical. Things like that are all possible if we put a bit more sort of rigor, I guess, in engineering around this. And so, and I think two bigger questions around, can the roadmap be, an interactive tool in terms of a dialogue? Is there a way for people to vote on features? That's sort of something you often see in roadmaps. And so we have a lot of customer communications through our app, through people feeding back feature ideas and suggestions, and that sort of definitely informs the roadmap. But the idea to be able to sort of close that loop and directly communicate with our customers through the roadmap is kind of a really nice idea. So, I mean, these are all things that may happen in our future, I guess.
Daniel, what about you? Talking about the tools that we use to ship this externally.
Yeah, I mean, Anson's answer was the exact right answer, and it goes to me too, except ours is a Figma file rather than an Illustrator file. Otherwise, same deal, and also ours is much less interactive at the moment. So we're following in good footsteps, basically, on our end.
And Sarah, what tools did you use?
Yeah, internally Confluence, obviously, but I think we had the benefit of an incredible web platform. So we have a whole team called the BXP team that are like incredible, and we have a common CMS. And so it wasn't a huge engineering effort to get off the ground because we already had all those core components. But we partner with that team we put all the content in a staging area, and then they're able to publish it. But just like you guys said, like we are actively looking at how we can improve the usability and accessibility of the roadmap, working on further localization, as well as things like better search, better filters, and additional features like following individual roadmap items. We just did a bunch of customer research. We actually had customers look at the roadmap and give us feedback, and a lot of them are looking for those one or two really big rocks when it comes to compliance or security or data residency. And so they want to just get notified when there's an update on a specific item versus looking at 100 items. So we are definitely looking to improve that over time and make it into something that's usable, not just for our big enterprise customers, but for any customer.
Got it. And we're going to spend the last few minutes wrapping up, kind of talking about reflections and feedback from customers. But before we get there, I want to ask one question that kind of brings us back to the beginning, which is why do this? I hear from a lot of people about why you should not do this. You should not do it because you're going to leak your information to the competitors and then they're going to know what you're building. You should not do it because, maybe you won't ship those things in time, or like we talked about before, the product team and others figured out actually wasn't a very good idea, or we couldn't do it for whatever reasons. Kind of open floor to anyone here. Like, What's your answer to that, to those naysayers?
I'm happy to jump in first. Like we get that question a little bit, like, particularly as a a neobank that's sort of very focused on innovation and competing with in Australia, it's the big four, the huge big four pillar banks. And is there this idea that you are, giving away your secret sauce with the roadmap? I think our answer to that is, first of all, most of the ideas, even that we've come up with, they actually exist in these big organizations. Their problem isn't so much thinking of the idea, it's kind of getting it built and executed and prioritized and put out there. So there's kind of that element. I don't think someone's going to read a one-word label and a light bulb's necessarily going to go on. And for that matter, a feature that we just shipped is joint accounts, which could be quite a boring feature. And in terms of the roadmap, it's joint account, it's banking for two people. But the way we kind of reimagined that and launched it as this what we call two-player banking, this sort of collaborative, almost like gamified experience. It's nothing in the roadmap really speaks to that execution of the idea. So I think the bigger risks are probably more around customer expectation. If people see something's in development, like our roadmap started out with sort of quarterly estimates. And those worked great for a couple of quarters, and then one or two items start slipping, and that almost certainly means that will carry on, right? It's very hard to catch up, particularly as you get further out. The estimates are probably more and more or less well informed. So I think it's probably more the risks. I don't think are so much on giving away secret information, like perhaps there are some companies where that could be an issue if they were going to highlight some massive breakthrough on the roadmap. But I think it's really around how do you manage customer expectation. It's certainly a trade-off. On the one hand, customers love that transparency and that kind of being able to look into the machine and see what's happening. But the expectations are always very hard to meet. They're always incredibly high, and that's a great challenge to rise to. But managing that, that's a tougher one. But I think I think the trade-off means it's worth it, right? Like there may be some people that want things sooner. I mean, everyone wants things sooner, but having that transparency, I think, is the bigger win.
Yeah, I can hop in. I think for us, I think the first answer, especially internally, was, well, but we're going to share all our dates, and what if we slip? And you're holding us to this high standard. And I think that's the point. If we're committed to our customers and we want to be transparent, we sort of have to be. And so I think that was one of the things we got over and that's a really typical, especially in an engineering-led organization. We don't want a public roadmap because we don't want to be held to having to deliver. And I think making that shift towards being open and transparent, and we have really big things that we need to deliver that our customers are counting on us for. And so if we can be forthcoming about that, that also leads to our land's credibility if it's public versus hidden behind a sales conversation, right? And so that was one of the big motivators for us. But other reasons in terms of like not to do it in terms of the competitor piece, I think for us, it was kind of an inverted challenge where we are competing with really large enterprise SaaS companies, and they all have public roadmaps. Like this is table stakes for enterprise SaaS. And so for us, it was not, hey, our competitors are going to copy our playbook. It was, we don't have this and our competitors do. And so by not having it, it was actually doing us a disservice of not being able to allow customers to check off all those boxes rather than having to have a high touch conversation. And so for us, it was really about how do we meet our competition and be able to offer the same thing as our competitors in terms of being transparent. So for us, it was a little bit different of a challenge, but yeah, definitely an interesting journey to try to get buy-in internally to convince everyone that this was something that was important.
Transitioning
a little bit. Just jump. Sorry.
Yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
I was just gonna jump in on that point because I think that the thing with like Atlassian and Wise and Up is that we are all really engineering driven, maybe even led companies, right? Like there's a huge capability there, and you do not want to, if you're in an organization where maybe you're not as confident around that, you certainly don't want to use your roadmap as a way to crack the whip on engineering and sort of almost as a wishful thinking sort of device, right? Like it really needs to be something that you get buy-in from the engineers to, and not a way to sort of drive deadlines as much as a way to reflect to the public, what you feel confident in being able to deliver.
Oh, totally. And it's totally a partnership for us. It's not just product led, like engineering is there helping to vet the dates. And I think for them, they can look at this and say, wow, we're taking this to the next level by being transparent. So for us, it's definitely been a really awesome motivator.
That's great. I think to wrap us up, I'm really curious, like, what has the reaction been? The reason we did this, all of our companies did this, was to bring more information to our customers. So what has the reaction been among customers? What, A, and then B, how do you facilitate that feedback loop? We touched on it a little bit, which is like, how do you make sure this is not just a one-way communication route, but how do you make that a two-way thing? Maybe Daniel, do you want to start?
Yeah, sure. So we've had a lot of really positive engagement on this since we put out the first blog post and the second one recently. Like, the reaction has been overwhelmingly sort of encouraging and very much engaged from customers. People are excited to see what we are kind of pinning to the now, next, later column and saying, yes, we can't wait for that. Or there's been quite a lot of, hey, can you add this thing to it? Which is exactly the response we were hoping for, I think. It's this sort of, yes, we want to hear from you. We want this is our conversation with you. So we're already seeing the right signs. And now I think the next question for us is, how do we take that off the comment section of social media and into a forum where we can actually have that dialogue and sort of, I think Anson said it before, close the loop a bit, because at the moment, it's going to be very hard to say to the person who was comment number 15 on LinkedIn, yeah, you asked for Indonesian rupee or whatever to be a from currency. We shipped it, because we can't remember three months later that person commented. So if we can preserve it in a way that we can see it, that we can sort of track it, that we can kind of like provide the other end of that conversation, and also sort of aggregate the responses and start to see the patterns, I think that's the direction we want to build this out. And I don't necessarily see the shape that takes yet, but I think the kind of the value in doing something like that and figuring out an elegant way to do that is really, really clear from the response we've had to the first couple of iterations of this. So I guess that's at least a vision for where I'd like to go with the roadmap.
Sarah, Anson, any thoughts you have on like stimulating that two-way conversation?
Yeah, I can hop in there. For us, it's as much about kind of that self-service model as well as facilitating those higher touch conversations. So in addition to the public roadmap, we also have a slide version where we actually produce this deck every quarter that matches what's on the public roadmap for our sales teams and partners actually to go and have those higher touch vision and future roadmap conversations with customers. We found that opening a web page might get too detailed depending on the level of audience. And so to facilitate that conversation, at least one-sided, we have produced that slide deck. And then in terms of customer intake and closing the loop, we have Atlassian Community, which allows community members to come and give feedback and for PMs to interact. We also have something called jira.atlassian.com, where we call Jack internally, where customers can request a feature and they can upvote them. And so our PMs also go and close the loop there. If something's been posted to the public roadmap or shipped, it's a way for us to do intake as well as closing that loop. Again, as much as like customers have thousands and thousands and thousands of feature requests. And so we do our best to kind of synthesize those, put them in as big rocks on the roadmap, but it's also important to us to be able to close that loop so that customers feel like we're listening and also taking action rather than like screaming into the abyss. And so for us, it's kind of that input as well as the output and closing the loop that's worked really well.
Yeah, I think from the up point of view, I think it's been interesting the sort of growth of the tree. You know, like to maybe not overuse the metaphors, but you know, it started out really as a published artifact, but it's sort of become a product in its own right in some ways. So I think at a point in time we were sort of making good progress through the tree, thinking, you know, when are we going to update and how much stuff will we put on it? And we actually ended up kind of building this concept around, you know, in Australia at the time was coming up to spring. So we kind of had this idea of the spring tree and these kind of new green shoots of features that were going to grow from previous stuff. And it just kind of kept sort of expanding. And we ended up doing a meetup to announce the kind of spring tree, this kind of seasonal update of the tree, everyone came and listened to us talk about stuff that we were going to build in the future, which seems insane on reflection. But I think having that as a structure, it wasn't just, hey, here's 12 crazy ideas from the product guy. It was kind of like these expansions of the tree in these various directions. It's really become sort of a fairly core part of our identity, I think, and our relationship with customers, which is, awesome. It's been great.
Okay, last question. I'm going to go around. If a new person was coming to you and say, hey, I'm thinking about doing this for my company, like what's a one piece of advice you could give me, or the one tip? Could be as tactical or as big picture. What's one piece of advice you would give me if I was trying to do this for the first time at my company?
I can go first. I have like 100 things, but I think the biggest one, and this is something that we still grapple with, is building the governance model first. So really defining what is the right level, as we talked about before, of something that should go on the roadmap. It shouldn't be, I changed the color of a button. It shouldn't be an entire product, but figuring out like what that right level is based on the audience that you define, and putting the guardrails in terms of governance, like only put committed work on the roadmap. Here's what it means when we say coming soon versus in the works. And then another like really detailed thing that we are grappling with right now is categories. So we've had an explosion of categories. And so as we think about usability, like what's our governance model on when do we have a new category? What goes under what category? Really, really specific, but something that I think if we had defined the governance model in the beginning and like we didn't know what we didn't know, right? I think we've discovered this as we've gone along. But really like given your audience that you're designing for, how are you making sure that you have the right governance model in place to make sure you're hitting the right level for that audience, especially when it comes for us, our audience is enterprise customers. Obviously, all customers will benefit from the roadmap, but for us to define what are those big rocks that enterprise customers are expecting, and making sure all the roadmap items are at that level is definitely a challenge. And so that's something that I think before you start, be really thoughtful about that.
Anson, what about you? What's a piece of advice?
Yeah, I think like Sarah really hit the nail on the head there. It's really about finding that right altitude, that right level of granularity. Sorry, like it's not your roadmap is not a backlog. It's a communications tool, to communicate with customers or potentially stakeholders. So, I guess, and particularly with our approach as this kind of very visual approach, the first thing you really need to do is just have a crack, like see it, get it down on paper or in a Notion doc or in an Illustrator file, whatever your tool of choice is. Just see if it works, because I think you'll uncover a lot of those issues and a lot of those questions you'll need answers for, like that what level of information goes on here, how far out are we looking, is this going to be something like up where it goes backwards as well as forwards? Some of those things are probably best answered just by trying to do it, before you've tried to engage huge numbers of people in the organization. Just see if it even makes sense at a high level.
Daniel, can you wrap us up and tell us one piece of advice that you'd offer to people?
Sure thing. Yeah, I think Sarah and Anson both said like my top 2 points, but I think I'd echo Anson where he said take a crack, because really like the value that came out of doing this was so enormous. The amount of good conversations that happened internally about what is a meaningful feature, why are we doing topic X, like how is it connected to the mission? And just I didn't realize you were doing Y and Z, like that's great, let's coordinate. This was amazing. Even if we'd never published this externally, it would have created so much value that it was absolutely the best ROI that I've had on anything I've done this year, probably, at least for me personally. So take a crack, absolutely go and give it a try. Even if you never end up publishing it externally, the sort of discipline and the experience of doing it will be something well worth it. So to all of you listening out there, go give it a shot.
That's really fantastic. Well, we've covered a broad range of topics. Thank you all so much for your time, especially across time zones, very different time zones. Appreciate you being generous with your time, Anson, Sarah, and Daniel. And for all of you out there, thank you also for joining another installation of WiseTalks, where we continue to bring the best minds across product and marketing and engineering to talk about topics that are important for customers. So thanks again for everyone tuning in.
Thanks, Lindsay.
Thanks, Lindsay.
Thank you.